Historical Society for hosting me for this wonderful lecture. My name again is Jean-Guy Dube. I am an architectural historian and draftsman. I have been researching Southern Pacific railroad depots since I was 11 years old, way back when. I grew up in a small town called Indio, California. I saw a picture of the old train station in my hometown and I fell in love with it. And as that 11-year-old, I went out to one of the busiest railroad yards in Southern California, in Indio, looking for the Indio Southern Pacific Depot. So you can imagine this 11-year-old kid wandering around one of the busiest railroad yards, looking for this train station. And I wasn't there more than about 10 minutes before a gentleman came up to me and said, "Son, it's not safe for you to be here." And I said, "Well, you know, I'm looking for this depot." And I held up a picture of the Indio train station. And he said, "Son, that thing burned down 20 years ago." Of course, I was disappointed, and he read that in my face, but it changed his attitude towards me. And he started telling me stories about the railroad history in Indio and about the Indio Depot Hotel, and that he had worked there when the building still existed. And it sparked a passion and a fascination for me to learn more about this railroad depot in my hometown. That led to a lifelong passion and interest in researching railroad history, specifically of depots. It's given me a absolutely wonderful career in the field of architectural history and drafting. Up until recently, for 15 years, I was working for the firm of Appleton Partners, one of the top 100 architectural firms in the United States. And after I moved to Gardnerville, Nevada with my family from California, I just started a position with the Department of Public Works as a state of Nevada employee. So this is my new home. I'm looking forward to researching all the new depots that are around me up here and continuing my great work researching and studying these depots. As Tom mentioned, I am a national award-winning draftsman. In 2017, I won the Leicester B. Holland Prize from the National Park Service and Library of Congress. I currently have 3 blueprints in the Library of Congress, soon to be 4. So I'm really excited to be documenting historic buildings and sharing my love and passion for these depots with the community. So let's delve right in. So we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite areas of Southern California, San Bernardino County. It has a rich history of 4 railroad companies that served the area, which is typical of most of Southern California. You know, we had the Southern Pacific Railroad, the Santa Fe, the Pacific Electric, and the Union Pacific, formerly the Salt Lake and San Pedro Railroad. How San Bernardino got its start, it was split off from San Diego County in 1892 and became its own large county. And very early on, the railroads played a vital part in the development of San Bernardino County and specifically Southern California. As you can see, beginning in as early as the 1880s, the Southern Pacific was in the picture, also joined with the Santa Fe. By 1903, the Pacific Electric had started entering the picture and extending its lines into San Bernardino and Riverside County. And kind of a late start was the Union Pacific, formerly the Salt Lake San Pedro Railroad, back in the 1920s. This map kind of gives you an idea of the scope and location of some of these road lines coming into San Bernardino County. You can see the blue lines are for the Santa Fe, the red are the Pacific Electric, green is the Southern Pacific, and yellow is the Union Pacific. And this is a little brief history of the railroads as they came in. Again, Southern Pacific in the 1870s, the Santa Fe in the 1880s, Again, the Pacific Electric in the early 1900s, and then a little bit later for the Union Pacific Railroad. So as the different railroads came through San Bernardino County, they built a myriad of road stations to serve the various communities. Now, in some instances, there were duplications. Sometimes there were 2 railroad stations for a particular city. Sometimes there were 3, and in some rare instances, there was up to even 4. So the communities were well serviced by the railroads. This is kind of the listing of some of the major cities in San Bernardino and the railroads that served them. You can see the different heralds for the Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, Pacific Electric, and Union Pacific. And in some instances, like say Redlands, you had a Santa Fe depot, a Southern Pacific depot, and a Pacific Electric depot. San Bernardino, the same thing, Santa Fe, Southern Pacific, Pacific Electric. So there was a lot of different communities that had multiple depots. Look at Ontario. It had a Southern Pacific, a Union Pacific, and a Pacific Electric. As a lot of the people know, the Pacific Electric was actually a subsidiary of the Southern Pacific, and it provided a interurban network through Southern California and through San Bernardino County. Now, compare this list to what we see today. These are the remaining depots that survive in San Bernardino County, and you can see there was quite a few depots that have been lost to time and progress, vandalism, neglect. It's really shocking that for all of the other depots that had been built, only a very small handful survive today. So let's start our journey and taking a look alphabetically at some of these wonderful and unique stations that existed in San Bernardino County. Of course, I'm partial to the Southern Pacific. That's the railroad that I really love and study and passionate about. And here we are in Bloomington. This is the Southern Pacific Depot. It was a 2-story station. The second story was for the agent and his family. You had usually 2 types of depots. You would either have a single-story depot, which had an office, passenger waiting room, freight room, baggage room, and freight house. If it was a 2-story affair, that allowed the agent to live with his family. Railroading was a 24-hour-a-day job in most instances, and the railroads preferred to hire men that had families because they were more reliable. So typically on the upstairs of a 2-story depot, you would have usually like a living room, a dining room, bedrooms. Later, with the advent of indoor plumbing and connections to like municipal water services and things like that, restrooms would be added, usually around 1910 or so. But a lot of these early style depots did not have indoor plumbing. They were often added later. And if you needed to use the facilities, they usually had water closets or outhouses that were located at the far end of the freight house of the depot. Made sense. Next, we come to the community of Bryn Mawr. This was renamed from Redlands Junction in 1892. This was one of Southern Pacific's standard depots. There were 26 standard designs that they built. That's kind of unique to the Southern Pacific. This one is a number 18, and when you look at the depot, the office and the waiting room is to the left-hand side. So when you're facing a depot, this is a number 18 left-hand station. You'll hear left-hand, right-hand. So if you're researching a particular depot, maybe you're modeling it, you can look and you can see which side the office is oriented when you're standing on the tracks facing the depot. Again, this was a 2-story, so the second story was for the agent and his family. This particular depot was closed in 1953 and moved shortly thereafter. Here is the little small station at Cajon. This is a board and batten depot built by the Santa Fe. It was established in 1885 and it was removed by 1962. You can see some additional railroad buildings off to the right, likely employee housing or section house. A lot of these remote stations, they serviced an area of track, usually 10 miles in either direction. So they would have track crews that lived near these stations, and then they would go out and do inspections and repairs as needed on the tracks. Here's another Southern Pacific depot, again, a number 18 depot. This one is a right-hand number 18, built in Chino, California, built in 1891 and closed in 1963. And here's a picture of the depot in the mid-1930s. One of our cute little depots, this was the Colton Depot. This was the third depot built for the Santa Fe in 1927. It's a Spanish Mediterranean style depot. This is a really charming little station. There had been model kits built of this particular depot. And we're very fortunate that despite being closed in 1979, this particular depot is still with us today. So here it is in 1991, and a little bit of a more photograph from about 10 years ago. And it's an office for the railroad for the now joined Burlington Northern and Santa Fe Railway. So you can't really access it because it's behind fencing and it's an active office for the railroad. But you can get some really nice shots of it across the street, if there's not a train blocking it. Staying in Colton, here is the Southern Pacific Depot that was built in Colton in 1887. This one, again, is a two-story depot. And the second story in this particular depot was used as offices for the railroad. This particular type of depot, there was about 5 of these built in the Southern Pacific system. This is referred to as a Salem-style depot because the very first depot of this particular type was built in Salem, Oregon. So there was other ones in Santa Cruz that was a variant. There was one in San Luis Obispo, the one in Salem, Oregon, and then there was one in Santa Barbara, California. The Colton Depot actually survived up until about 2012. Here's a nice photo of it in the 1910s, showing a lot of railroad activity. This was a very busy junction point, not only for the Southern Pacific, but it was for the Pacific Electric as well. It was extensively remodeled from its Victorian wooden style in 1922. This was very typical for the railroads in the 1920s and early teens. The older wooden Victorian depots were kind of seen as outdated. So it made sense that the railroad would update their buildings rather than build a brand new depot. It was a little bit cheaper for them. So in this instance, they often went back and they stripped off all of the Victorian detailing, all the fretwork and everything, and then they would stucco and modernize these stations. A lot of times they would add concrete floors, replacing the old wooden ones, and they would streamline the buildings. And again, this was very common for the railroads to renew and rejuvenate some of their aging and older depots. Here's a nice view of some Pacific Electric trains coming into the Colton Depot. And another great view of another Pacific Electric motor car stopped at the station. You can see that it's actually about to cross the main line of the Southern Pacific, which is in front of the station. So when the depot was closed in 1975, it was used as a business. And it was the Cal Gypsum Supply building. Sadly, this depot was demolished in 2012 when the Burlington Northern Santa Fe and the Union Pacific wanted to build their flyover project, and the depot was in the way. It's really a shame because, again, this building was built in 1887, and it was one of the oldest buildings in the area, and just sadly, it wasn't really documented or really looked at as a historic resource, and was just demolished. I had an opportunity to go inside this building before it was demolished, when it was still Cal Wall Gypsum Supply, and unfortunately the owners at the time would not let me take photos inside the business, which is a real loss to our community because interior photographs of depots are very rare. And it was for me, it was an honor to be able to go inside and actually look inside this depot. But sadly, I don't have any interior photographs because at the time, they didn't feel it was important. And then sadly, we lost this building. So, the only pictures we have of it are from the outside. Taking a look at the community of Crafton, California, again, another standard Southern Pacific number 18 depot. Again, this one is a left-hand side. And you can actually see that this is a great photo because it's a construction photo. You can see the workmen are painting the newly finished train station in 1892. So they're giving the depot its first coat of paint. I wish this was a colorized version. You would see that the upper parts of the walls were yellow, the lower parts were kind of like a goldenrod, the trims were brown, and the window sashes were white. And when these depots were first built, the shingles that you see were actually a natural wood shingle. Later, they were painted red, and then eventually they were painted green. So these buildings were very chromatic in design. And you can easily identify Southern Pacific depots because of that brown-yellow paint scheme. Looking at the community of Cucamonga, this is one of Santa Fe's early kind of standard style single-story wood depots. This was very typical for a lot of the depots that they built in not only San Bernardino County, but Riverside County as well. It's kind of like an East Lake style with the horizontal siding and all of the great little Victorian fretwork on there. Usually they would have the Santa Fe logo. If you look kind of closely at the ends of Cucamonga, you can actually see the Santa Fe logo incorporated into the woodwork of the sign. This was built in 1887 and it was remodeled in 1945. And again, remember, just like the Southern Pacific, the Santa Fe and other railroads were going through and modernizing their older Victorian stations. So here's an episode where the Santa Fe streamlined, moderned an earlier Victorian station and turned it into this really nice modern style depot in 1945. The depot was closed in 1978 and sadly it burned down in 1991. That's a very common fate for buildings if they're not adaptively reused. Vagrants go in there or people just abuse the buildings and they can be lost to time. Here's another depot in Cucamonga. This one's for the Southern Pacific. This one was a number 17 left-hand style depot. This was another common standard. The ones we had seen so far was the number 18, but this was the version prior to that. This is the number 18. Again, agents' quarters on the second floor, living quarters. This was renamed in 1910 to Gustai, and then this particular depot was closed in 1963, and it was taken down shortly thereafter. Moving on to the Santa Fe Depot in Devore, California. This is kind of like a Mediterranean style depot, built in 1904 and removed by 1949. But I love this photograph because if you look up on the upper eaves of this building, you can see they've incorporated the Santa Fe cross and circle into the plaster detailing of the brackets. And you can, of course, see the Santa Fe logo prominently on the station sign of DeBoer and on the boxcar that's located behind the depot. So this is a great, great photo. Moving to the little community of Etiwanda, Santa Fe had a small little one-story depot that was there, built in 1887, but this was removed in the 1920s. And this is showing the depot around 1921. The Pacific Electric also served the community of Etiwanda. This was their depot, which was built in the mission revival style, built in 1914 and closed in 1941. This, we're lucky, is because this depot still is with us today, although it is not actively used. It is boarded up and somewhat protected. There are plans to restore and adaptively reuse the building, but it's been quite a few years since there's been any kind of like active activity on this building. And as you can see in this particular photo, one of the decorative tiles underneath the Etiwanda sign that had the Pacific Electric logo was removed. Again, that can happen if a depot is not being used. It can be basically vandalized or damaged if it's not protected. And they went over and of course they put up plywood to protect the windows and the door openings and prevent people from gaining access to the building. So hopefully in the near future, this depot listed on the National Register of Historic Places will actually have a bright and adaptive reuse and future. Coming to the community of Fontana, this is the joint Southern Pacific Electric and Railway Express Agency depot. This particular depot was built in the 19-teens, and here it is in 1937. Here's another great view of the passenger and freight depot in the distance. And the freight depot is still with us today, although we lost the passenger station. This is the Pacific Electric Southern Pacific freight house. And this was taken back in 2014. So they built a nice little parkway along the old Pacific Electric right-of-way. And I think it's believed it's used as a community building now, a community space. Also, the Santa Fe, again, an example where multiple railroads served a particular community, built this charming little depot in 1925. This was closed in 1967 and sadly demolished in 1968, a year after that. But here's the depot in slightly happier times around 1955, although the car in the photo might date it to a little bit earlier than that. My dad used to take me to the community of Loma Linda when he used to go to the Veterans Administration building out there. So this is a community that I've visited sometimes when I was younger. But of course it was well after this particular depot had disappeared from the scene. This was originally probably an 8-post shelter that was expanded into a baggage building. This particular depot was had a nice vintage of 1888, but sadly it washed away in some flooding in 1916. But here's the depot in a nice setting in 1912. And this was below the Loma Linda Hospital. So the patients going to the hospital and sanitarium would stop and get off the train here at the Loma Linda station. Here's one of these wonderful little charming Santa Fe depots, the one in Mentone, California, built in 1892, sadly demolished in 1940, and here it is in 1931. It's a great little East Lake style depot, very, very charming. There's very few of these kinds of East Lake style depots left in Southern California. Moving on to the community of Ontario. This is a rare photograph of the Ontario Southern Pacific Depot. This again was also a number 17, just like we saw at Cucamonga. This one was built in 1887. And so if you've noticed a pattern, when a particular, well, especially for the Southern Pacific, as they were building their lines through Southern California and through San Bernardino County, they would have a particular style that they were using at the time. So a word about standardized depots, they allowed for fast construction. It was cost effective for the railroads. These particular depots were all built out of California heart redwood that was lumbered and milled in Northern California, brought down to the Southern Pacific's shops in West Oakland, where they had the Southern Pacific operated their own milling, and they would produce all of the lumber siding, the trim boards. They made their own doors and windows and furniture and the roofing shingles. And these were all standard designs. So what they would do is they would make a kit of parts. They would put the finished lumber and the parts for the depot, the doors, windows, door sills, hardware, things like that, in boxcars, along with a set of standard design blueprints, and they would ship it to the community where they were building a particular depot. A typical construction would take about anywhere between 2 to 3 months. Usually these were very fast. They put up a brick foundation and then they would immediately start on assembling the station. So these were modular in the fact that the freight house could be extended. So if it was a small community that didn't expect a lot of freight traffic, you might have a freight door on each side of the depot, one on the street side, or team side of the depot. That's where you brought your horse and buggy, your team, up to unload your agricultural goods and things like that. And then on the track side, or the platform side of the depot, that's where goods would be loaded onto the trains, or vice versa. Goods could be offloaded from these 4-foot-high platforms and brought into the depot. So if a particular town was large and you had a lot of freight anticipated traffic, as it's hard to see it in this photograph, but there's 2 freight doors on the track side and 2 freight doors on the rear side of this particular depot. Sometimes you would see depots with 3 or sometimes even up to 4 freight doors. And the freight doors were spaced 40 feet apart, which allowed at that particular time a standard freight car was about 40 feet in length. So it allowed the doors of the box cars to align perfectly with the freight doors. So there was a lot of thought and planning in assembling and putting together these depots. Here's a look at the remodeled Ontario Depot a little bit later. This was remodeled in 1918 and then again in 1930. Here's a sad photo because the depot is actually in the process of being demolished in 1972. And you can see that at one point they added on an open waiting area when they stuccoed this particular depot and made it more modern. And they actually added on to the freight house, so it actually has 3 freight doors on the end of the station. Ontario was also served by the Salt Lake and later Union Pacific Railroad. Here's their Spanish-style, Mediterranean-style depot built in 1903. And they remodeled this particular depot in 1924. And you can see the new station sign. It's got the nice Spanish-style tiles on the roof, a nice little arcade there. Really a charming depot, but sadly, it was demolished after 1970. This is kind of a sad depot for me because it's one of those things. As a depot historian, I love all depots. And this was one that I always wanted to visit. It was on my bucket list. You know, I've been all throughout, I've lived in, you know, California, you know, for most of my life up until recently, until I moved to Nevada. And I always made it a point to try and visit as many depots as I could. And this was one of the depots that I learned later on was down in San Bernardino County, and I always made it a point I wanted to go see it. But sadly, I never did, and I regret that decision. It really was a beautiful depot, built in 1897. It had a really nice long history, and sadly it was demolished in 2020. So the lesson to be learned is don't take a historic building for granted. Never assume that because it's well known in the community that it's protected or that it's being cared for. You always have to be vigilant and, you know, get involved with preserving buildings and looking after them, because you never know when a depot or another historic resource is going to disappear. So don't procrastinate is my lesson for this particular station. And, you know, apply this lesson to other buildings that are threatened or neglected and look after them. Redlands has a lot of great historic buildings. I love that area. And I love your historic buildings, and I love your historical society and the work that you do. Now, speaking of Redlands, we naturally progress right in there. Here's a look at the Santa Fe station that was built in 1888. Here it is in 1907, all decked up for the visit of President Roosevelt in 1907. You can see his portrait there in the gable. And you can see all the banners and bunting and everything on this beautiful wood one-story passenger and freight depot. This actually survived up until a little bit after 1910, when it became a freight house, because in that year, actually the year prior in 1909, the Santa Fe wanted to embark on building a new replacement station. So they hired the firm of Bakewell and Brown, and they came up with this beautiful Beaux-Arts style depot with a really beautiful colonnade to replace the aging Santa Fe depot. And so this is actually a very early concept design for it by Bakewell and Brown. Of course, the depot that exists today is slightly different. That's very common for a depot to go through many iterations before it's actually constructed, versus what it looked like when it was designed. So this particular beautiful depot was built in 1910. I think it's a very charming station. It's definitely unique. There's not a lot of depots that are like this, with the really long colonnade, concrete construction. It's a really charming station. And it can influence the architecture around it. Here's the Chamber of Commerce that was adjacent to the Redlands Santa Fe depot. And here's a nice shot of the train arriving in the 1930s. And if you look in the distance, you can actually still see the old wooden Santa Fe depot at the end. You can kind of see the roof poking out on the end there. So what was common sometimes is that the railroads, when they built a new passenger depot, they would turn the original one into a freight house, not one to wasting a building if they didn't need to. So that was the adaptive reuse of the old freight house. Of course, we're lucky that this particular depot survived, although for a while there it was looking very forlorn. Here it is in 1999, after a couple of businesses had been in there and had closed out. In 2009, it had some just cosmetic painting, but it's got a lot of great architectural details. It's really a charming depot. It's, as much as I love the Southern Pacific, the Santa Fe really went out and architecturally detailed a lot of their wooden stations and their later Spanish style and Mediterranean style depots. They really are some beautiful, unique architecture. Southern Pacific had some too, but the Santa Fe really had some really unique treasures. And then here's some more looking at some of that great Beaux-Arts detailing and plasterwork. This depot was restored in the 2020, and so now it's being used for light rail. So a great rebirth and adaptive reuse of this building. And here's a nice, great overall shot. And one of the great benefits was that this was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So it'll be cherished for many years to come in the community. Looking at the Southern Pacific Depot for the community of Redlands, here is the colonnade style depot that was built in 1901. It was very common for the Southern Pacific in the early 1900s to build these colonnaded style depots. They built them throughout their system, mostly in Northern California. So this is kind of Northern and Central California. So this is kind of a rare example to see down in Southern California, although there were examples in Calexico, Mexicali, and things down even further south. But definitely unusual for the Redlands, for San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Here's a look of it when it was a joint agency just prior to the Pacific Electric coming in, which is shown in this next photograph. And I love this photo because here, I don't know if this is just a fun shot by tourists or if this is some kind of a publicity shot, but that's a date palm, and it looks like they're trying to harvest the dates or the seeds from the date palm there. The two ladies are trying to capture the dates from the tree. So it's kind of a fun little photo. Of course, again, the Southern Pacific wanted to modernize their what was seen as an older style station. So in 1924, they built this all concrete depot in Redlands. It was formed concrete, and actually I took this particular photo from a construction magazine in the 1920s, in 1924 specifically, that was advertising Portland cement. And this was one of those things where the Southern Pacific was starting to experiment with building cast concrete stations. The very first cast concrete depot that they built in California was the depot in Santa Barbara, California in 1906. So they were looking at this as a great building material. Here's a great rare view of the interior of that 1924 depot. You can see the concrete tile floor, the Southern Pacific schedule behind the two passengers that are waiting. You can see the agent and the gentleman at the ticket office. This is kind of a nice slide because it is rare to see a photograph of the interior of a depot. One of the things as a depot historian is that when people were taking pictures of depots, typically you want to capture a picture of the train. So the majority of depot photographs feature a train, which for me usually blocks the view of the station. In around 1912, the Interstate Commerce Commission embarked on a program to document the various railroad stations for all of the railroads. And so there were a lot of company photographers that would go out and document the train stations themselves. But again, typically they would only take exterior shots. If I'm lucky, you'd get a photograph of the front of the station. Sometimes you get one from the back, but it's very extremely rare to see one on the interior side. So this is a great photograph. And I'll take the photographs where I can find them. eBay, Etsy, Getty Images, different online archives. I partner with a lot of different historical societies when I do my lectures, and they're very gracious in sharing a lot of their depot photographs with me for public presentations such as this. But almost all the photographs I find are in the public domain. So I don't have any copyright or owner of these photographs. And another great resource is Google Books, and also newspaper archives and things like that. Sometimes you find photographs in private collections. So there's a lot of great resources if you're researching a particular train station or a community's history to find a lot of great early photographs. But the best place always, first place to look, historical societies. Here's kind of like a parting glance at the Southern Pacific Redlands Depot in 1947. This was closed in 1953, and then it was demolished not too long after that. Now, here's a little side building. Like I said, I normally focus on railroad depots, but this is a wonderful little treasure that I couldn't pass up and not include in this particular lecture for the Redlands Area Historical Society, because this is a really unique building. There's, so without further ado, this is the Redlands Central Railway car barn. There's only 2 car barns in all of Southern California. There's this one, and there's the one in Montrose for the Glendale and Montrose Railway. But this particular car barn is all brick, and that was the construction drawing of it in 1907. Here's a great early photograph of it, showing a streetcar coming out with the electric lines above. Excuse me. This particular building was closed. Well, it was part of the Redlands Railway. It eventually became absorbed by the Pacific Electric in 1910, when the Pacific Electric was buying up a lot of these individual municipal interurban railways. So it became kind of conglomerated into it. So it came under the umbrella of the Pacific Electric. The lines for the Pacific Electric in this area ceased operation in 1936. So the building was used as a car barn after that. It was sold by the Pacific Electric in 1944, in which case it became a private business. And that went off and on up until 1987, when the city of Redlands purchased it to save it from demolition. And they in turn turned it around and sold it in 1994. And now again, it's a private business, and now it's an automotive shop. And here's a neat interior photograph showing the construction of it. So it's all brick construction with iron trusswork and a cast or sheet metal roof, corrugated metal roof. And I've heard that the service pits are still in place in the depot or inside the car barn. And here's kind of a more contemporary view from just a couple of years ago that shows the building on the outside. That stucco facade, of course, that was all brick when it was originally built. And then, of course, over time with different owners, it was stuccoed. But as you saw in that early photograph, it was all brick originally. And fortunate for us, this was also placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So again, this building should be with us for many, many more years to come and be a cherished part of our historic fabric of this community. Moving on from Redlands, we're now going to the community of Rialto. Another one-story Santa Fe depot, again, very kind of standardized on for their particular types of depots, built in 1888, remodeled again in 1945. And it was turned into this interesting style depot, kind of like a modern style streamline station. And it was closed in 1967 and moved 2 years later in 1969. And this particular depot is still with us today. So it's a private business. This is the address where it's at now. So here is an 1887 building remodeled in the 1940s, surviving up until the modern day. So again, these depots can be adaptively reused and, for a variety of purposes. Here's another surviving story depot for us. This is the Pacific Electric Station in Rialto, built in 1914, so the same year as Etiwanda, and closed in 1947. And here it is in 1981. It's a radiator shop. And up until recently, it was a Mexican restaurant. So I'm not sure the use right now, but I believe it's becoming another restaurant. So again, another adaptive reuse for an old railroad station. Moving on to our county namesake, San Bernardino, the city itself. This was a very charming, kind of like a mission revival style depot built jointly between the Southern Pacific and the Salt Lake railroads. In 1893, at the Columbian Exposition, the United States and in general was introduced to the California mission revival style architecture. There was a wonderful building built at the Columbian World's Fair that was supposed to represent California, and it was built in a mission style. And for the people that went to the fair, it had a great influence on the architecture in California. So you saw things like the Southern Pacific building, the Burlingame Depot in 1894, that was in kind of like a mission revival style, the Santa Barbara Station in 1906. And so here's a kind of another early example, predating Santa Barbara's by 1 year. In 1905, this beautiful mission-styled depot, building on California's Spanish mission heritage. Here's a look of it a few years later in the 1940s, after the Union Pacific and the Salt Lake, of course, had not been using it. It was still being used by the Pacific Electric. They had their lines running to the rear of this station. And it was also jointly used by the Greyhound. Kind of an interesting foreshadowing of what was going to be happening with passenger traffic on the railroads. With the advent of bus lines, reliance on passenger traffic dwindled for the railroads. The railroads made most of their money, believe it or not, on freight service. Passenger service was kind of like bread and butter, but most of the time it was a losing proposition for the railroads. They didn't make a lot of money off of passenger traffic, although they did promote it heavily, because it did bring in, tourists and, settlers to California. So they did get some passenger revenue from that. But overall, their main purpose was, their main income was from freight. Here's a look at the back of the San Bernardino Depot. It's a rare shot. And here's a great little Pacific Electric motor car at the back of the station, which was closed in 1944 and demolished shortly thereafter. And to give you an idea of where that particular depot was, it was where the Carousel Mall was, and that has since been subsequently demolished. So it's a progress. Looking at the Santa Fe's Grand Depot in San Bernardino, here is their magnificent depot hotel and restaurant and eating house built in 1886. A magnificent East Lake style building. You can see the mule car there parked in front, and of course the railroad and freight in the back. Here's a look of the depot from the track side. You can see the operator's bay up there on the second floor. They had some railroad offices up there, division headquarters. So this was a very busy point for the Santa Fe coming into Southern California. And it makes sense that they built such a substantial depot here. Sadly, this depot burned down in 1917. But with all great disasters, 1916, this building was, a new depot replaced it in 1917, so just a year after. Here's a concept sketch for the replacement station in San Bernardino. William H. Moore designing it in a Spanish style. California in 1915 had just done the California Panama Pacific expositions in San Francisco and San Diego. Again, reinforcing that kind of mission style passion for architecture in California. So it made perfect sense that the Santa Fe would choose that style for this station. Just the year prior in San Diego in 1915, they built a magnificent Spanish-style depot that is also still with us today. Here's a look at the San Bernardino Depot under construction. Another example where the railroad is using cast concrete construction. It was a very durable material and easy to work with. You can also see the steel framing for the towers going up. And here is the depot as it's progressing. And kind of just before the depot was finished and opened in 1918. So it took almost a year to build this massive structure. And here's a look at the platform side of the depot as it's nearing completion. So this depot opened on July 15th, 1918 at a cost of $800,000. That was a lot of money back then. And just a beautiful arcade along the tracks. There's a great view of the train coming in the 1920s. And then you can see the addition of the Harvey House restaurant that was built, that was added to the depot 3 years after it opened. So the Harvey House restaurant portion wasn't part of the original construction. It was added 3 years later. And it's the portion you see off to the left. Here's a look at the street side of the depot, or the city side. You can see these are the railroad offices in the two-story portion and the wing off to the left. And here's the central part of the depot with offices above and the main entrance to the main waiting room and ticket counters on the lower floor in the 1920s. Here's a nice little Pacific Electric coming to the, whizzing by the San Bernardino Depot in the 1930s. And another great shot in the 1940s. And here's a more contemporary look at this depot. When I was living in Southern California, I loved going to this depot. I used to go there they would have like a little swap meet there. They also have a magnificent railroad museum. They've been very generous in sharing some of their historical files and photographs with me, which has been part of some of this photographs you've seen in this lecture. It's a really, if you're, because you guys are still there in that area, I highly encourage you to go see this station. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. So it's, protected, and they take very good care of this. It just actually underwent a massive exterior cleaning, so they fixed it up on the outside. Remember earlier I was mentioning Colton and the bypass over the crossover flyover. One of the things to kind of honor that history of that crossing was they actually took the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe crossing and they moved it in front of the entrance to the depot, and they embedded it in the concrete out there. So if you want to see a piece of Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, and California railroad history, that's the famous crossover between the Santa Fe and the Southern Pacific. So you can see that when you go and visit the station. Here's a great look at the San Bernardino History and Railroad Museum inside the depot. It's got a great railroad exhibit. I mean, it's just got lots of artifacts. They've got a great used bookstore. The staff there and the volunteers are very friendly. And every year they have a kind of like a little swap meet there. So it really is worth the visit and drive to go out and see this particular depot and visit the museum that's there. Again, on the National Register of Historic Places. And most recently, it was one of the 5 stamps that was just issued by the United States Postal Service commemorating historic train stations in the United States. So here you are, as a neighbor, you have a nationally recognized train station in your own backyard. And if you look at the stamps off to the left, you can see the wonderful artist rendition of the San Bernardino depot there in stamp form, joining some very other famous railroad stations in the United States. So that's a great honor for them. So as we kind of come alphabetically towards the end of our journey, again, I'm really happy that, you guys have been such a great audience and everything. Taking kind of like a look as we kind of like are exiting out of San Bernardino County and heading up. This is the community of Summit, another Santa Fe depot. This one was established in 1885. Here it is in 1949. You can see a great train making it up the grade. And coming up to Upland, one of the last communities we're going to be visiting. This is the one-story wooden depot built in 1887, and this was also remodeled. And here it is today. So this particular depot is still with us. It was remodeled again, kind of like a Spanish Mediterranean style depot, and it's used as a business today. And it has the benefit that it's still adjacent to the railroad tracks, and it's part of the light rail system. So, again, a great adaptive reuse for a historic building. So a lot of times, most of these old depots aren't used by the railroads or light rail anymore, but they still are preserved and enjoy a great life today. Finishing off, this is the joint Southern Pacific Electric Depot in Upland. There's a great photo of the Pacific Electric red car coming up to the station. So if you're interested in learning more about some of these wonderful railroad depots that we've covered and journeyed to visit this evening, I encourage you to look at some of these great books and resources. My mentor, I always have to thank him, Henry Bender Jr. He is the godfather of Southern Pacific Depot research. I collaborated with him to produce blueprints for his Southern Pacific Line Standard Design Depots book. He's currently working on a second book, which is the non-standard depots. Henry is a wonderful gentleman. If you ever have a depot question, I encourage you to email him or myself or the Southern Pacific Technical and Historical Society, which I'm a member of, to ask us your depot questions. Mark Landis has been very generous with his research and materials, so he's a great expert on all things Santa Fe. Also a word out to my dear friend Lee Gustafson, who passed away a couple of years ago. Also a great knowledgeable person on Santa Fe depots, and was very generous with his knowledge and time with me, and his great friend Phil Serpico, who produced these great books on the Santa Fe depots, especially the coastline depots, which covers San Bernardino County. There's a great book on the Pacific Electric stations. Of course, author John Signor, fabulous railroad author. He's written on the Los Angeles Division, the Los Angeles and Salt Lake Railroad books, Jeff Assay, Union Pacific and the Los Angeles Basin, and the late Larry Mullally and, Larry Mullally and the late Bruce Petty with the Southern Pacific and Los Angeles book. Great resources if you're interested in researching more about railroad history in general, or some of these depots that were covered this evening in this lecture. And if you'd like to contact me, I encourage your depot-related questions and stories, clippings. Maybe you had a family member that lived in one of those two-story depots, or you had an uncle that was an agent in a station, or maybe you have some great photo albums that have clippings and photos of some of these great stations. I am always surprised because when it comes to the point when I do my question and answer period, I get all kinds of great stories, and I love learning about the history of these buildings. I don't profess to know everything about them, but I always learn a lot from when I give these presentations and from the public and my audience. So, again, please feel free to contact me at my email address. And if you're interested in purchasing some of the blueprints that I draw, I do have an Etsy store where I sell some of my blueprints. The book that you saw, kind of like the main slide for my Railroad Depots book, it's very popular. I made 500 copies, and sadly it is sold out. I am hoping to publish some additional copies in the near future, but I am working on a second volume. It'll be all brand new depots, some Pacific Electric, maybe some Santa Fe, and definitely, of course, Southern Pacific. So with that, again, I want to thank the Redlands Area Historical Society for hosting me, and for Tom to attending my lecture in San Bernardino and inviting me to join you this evening, to share my passion and love of these train stations. I hope I've given you a little bit of appreciation for some of these great historic treasures. Again, be watchful for them and be stewards of your community, not just of train stations, but of all of your historic resources. So again, thank you so much. And the wonders of technology. I'm hearing Gardner Vildavada, presenting to you guys. So, it's great. I love actually doing Zoom lectures. I do them all the time, and you guys have been great. So, with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Maria and Tom, and I'll be happy to answer your questions either in the chat or there for the room. Thank you guys. Barstow. Oh, that's a good question. I should have included it in this lecture, because it's a magnificent two-story building. It was a Harvey house. I think it must have just been an oversight on my part. I'll have to add that for the next time I do this and update this lecture. It's. Oh, go ahead.
Someone mentioned needles as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sometimes, what happens is like when I'm looking at a geographic area, I kind of like tend to focus on the areas where I've been a lot and spent a lot of time researching and studying. So sometimes I do forget. I mean, I can't believe I forgot Needles and Barstow. I mean, they are in the county, so that was just an oversight on my part. But yes, by all means, those are beautiful, beautiful Santa Fe depots. They had early wooden style depots that were there. And in fact, the Needles one was, a magnificent train station. But I mean, both of the surviving ones are great. And I know they're doing some construction. They're replacing, I think, the old highway bridge that's over by is it the Barstow Depot, I think, right now? They're building a new overpass over the tracks there and stuff. So, it's just, those are great train stations. So thank you for mentioning that.
What about Kelso?
What about Kelso?
Is Kelso in San Bernardino County?
Yep.
Okay, I'll have to add that then for this lecture as well. Now remember, I am a Southern Pacific nut, so I tend to focus on the Southern Pacific. So again, my apologies to those communities for leaving those out. In fact, actually, I've been to Needles and Barstow and Kelso. The Kelso Depot is a beautiful two-story Union Pacific depot in the Spanish Mediterranean style. And I believe it's also on the National Register of Historic Places. So again, it's if you're driving out, that way, it's definitely worth the side trip out there. They have a little museum in there. When you go upstairs, you can actually see some of the restored rooms that they had in the building. So you can kind of see how people would live there and worked there and everything. So it's a great station to visit. So my apologies to those communities for omitting them, but I will add them for the next time. Thank you.
Do you have any about the alphabetical towns of the Santa Fe and the desert?
You'll have to repeat that. Do you have any,
Of the alphabetical
Of the
towns?
alphabetical
Asheville,
towns.
Baghdad, Cadiz.
Oh, you mean like the list?
Yeah.
At the beginning of my slideshow, I had that list. So, I can, of course I will, the next time I update my lecture, I'm going to go and add those. It was an oversight on my part. But yeah, I didn't list them even in there. So that was just an oversight. And big depots, I mean, how can I miss like gigantic two-story massive depots?
The ABCs across the Mojave Desert were division 6-mile increments with a sign, and that's it. They didn't have a depot.
Well, no, there was, at Cadiz, there was actually a station, and there was one at Gulfs.
Repeat the question too. Oh, he was asking about the ABC names across the Mojave Desert. I said they were 6-mile division lines, that I didn't believe they had stations, but he said that Cadiz had a station.
Yes, I believe Cadiz had a station as well. Yeah, I mean, I try to be as inclusive as I can when I'm doing my lectures. I don't always include every single depot that there would be. I mean, we could be here for a long time.
Just a couple more questions from the audience. There's one more.
Sure, of course.
What about the depot? There was one in the canyon down at the end of Fern Street in Redlands.
Was there a depot at the
Yeah,
end of
he
Fred
showed it.
Canyon?
I didn't-
That was the Redlands Depot in San Jose Canyon, was
And
concrete.
then there was another one, as I remember, between Redlands Boulevard and the Santa Fe station.
You wanna repeat that for?
Yeah, he put that one in there too.
A Redlands station between Redlands Boulevard and the Santa Fe station.
It wasn't his, but it
Huh.
was there in the.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at a railroad map in order to see what
He put it
community
in.
that would have been. Now, sometimes what would happen is so I should have prefaced the lecture by saying this. So the definition of a depot is a building at a station. A station A lot of people sometimes refer to depots as stations. A station is a named place on the railroad. So for example, at Needles was a station on the Santa Fe Railroad. In addition to having, the station facilities, there was the depot at, Needles and so forth. So sometimes you could go to an area and maybe there is no depot or buildings, but you have a station sign. So again, it's just a way for the people working on the railroad to identify where they were at a particular area on the railroad by the station names and stuff. So again, station is a named place, and a depot or a freight house, those are actual buildings at a station. So a lot of people use the word depot and station interchangeably, but really a depot is like a freight or a passenger depot.
Regarding
Yeah.
the two depots of Redlands, there's the Junction Depot down at San Timoteo, and then there's the wooden one that had the picture, the portrait of Theodore Roosevelt. That was off of Redlands Boulevard, across the street from the Finney Block.
Do you want to repeat that for Jean-Guy? I don't think you can hear it.
The Redlands Depot that had the picture of Teddy Roosevelt Day on May 7th, 1907.
Yeah.
That was just commemorating the visit of him riding here May 7th, 1902. But it was just...
Oh, 1902.
Yeah, 1902
Oh, okay.
is when Teddy was here. And what was the other part of that question?
No, I was just stating that you had the two depots. You had the Junction Depot that was constructed of concrete, and you had the wooden depot, which was on Orange Street across from the Finney Block.
Redlands Junction was in Bryn Mawr.
Or Bryn Mawr.
Yeah, it was in Bryn Mawr.
Yeah.
And it was built in 1891 after the Southern Pacific purchased the Redlands and San Bernardino Railroad. The Redlands San Bernardino Railroad was narrow gauge, and they wanted to take advantage of that. So they came off of the Southern Pacific main line in a curve, went by the Mission Station, which was part of the San Bernardino and Redlands Railroad, then curved up Citrus Avenue, and then crossed the bridge across Redlands Boulevard, and came parallel to Redlands Boulevard and stopped at Orange Street.
But that was the concrete depot.
No,
No.
that was a wooden station that was right there in Bryn Mawr.
We have one more question up front.
Yes.
Yeah, I was curious about the Mentone station because it was so much different than a lot of the other stations. It appeared to have like a Dutch influence or an Austrian influence. Was that possibly because the people that settled in this area?
Did you hear that, Jean-Guy?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So sometimes what would happen is especially like when the Southern Pacific was building a depot, the community might actually have some input in the design of their station. Here's a perfect example. I don't know if you can still see my screen. This is the depot, the stone depot that was built in San Carlos, California by the Southern Pacific Railroad. Now, this was an affluent community up in the San Jose Bay Area. And when the particular depot was being designed for this community, the citizens of San Carlos lobbied to have this magnificent stone depot built for the area. And the Southern Pacific obliged. In fact, when they were building Stanford University, they quarried the same stones and used them to build this particular depot. This San Carlos depot still stands today. The same thing goes for the community of Kenwood, California, which is a sister depot to this, which also survives today. So in a community like Mentone, they may have, approached the Santa Fe and said, hey, we'd like to have a little bit more of an ornate depot for our community. And sometimes the railroad would respond and, they would maybe oblige the community. But a lot of times what would happen is sometimes the community would actually raise money to, maybe fund a differently designed depot. So they might, get something that wasn't like a cookie cutter or a standard style depot that stood out in the community. So like when passengers are passing through, they might say, wow, wow, Mentone, that's a really unique station, you know? I mean, look at the beautiful depot that's in Paris, you know? That's like a brick style depot, kind of like built at the same time as the one that was in Patton. The LeGrand station that was built in Los Angeles by the Santa Fe Railroad, that was also in kind of like this Moorish style. So, you know, it wasn't uncommon for the railroads to, you know, to design something different if the community asked, you know, would approach them. But more specifically, if the community was willing to pay for that, you know, kind of like custom designed depot, that they, you know, they would be able to kind of break the mold, so to speak.
Okay, time to stump the audience with a question. Name the Mentone station of Southern Pacific in Mentone. Name the Southern Pacific station in Mentone. No, not correct. Go ahead, we'll give it to our president. Montezuma.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So thank you.